If you attack a police officer with a flagpole, you get a pardon. If you try to drive away from a masked goon, you get executed. Jake Tapper just cornered Kristi Noem on this exact contradiction, and she completely froze.
I just showed you video of people attacking law enforcement officers. Undisputed proof, undisputed evidence. And I just said President Trump pardoned all of them. And you said that President Trump is enforcing all the laws equally. It's just not true.
That's the Secretary of Homeland Security being told to her face that her administration is lying, and she has nowhere to go. This is how you corner a politician who has no defensible position. And Kristi Noem's response was, well, it was something. Let me show you what happened. As the world is well aware, on Wednesday, January 7th, ICE agents in Minneapolis shot and killed a woman named Renee Good, a 37-year-old US citizen. According to witnesses, she was partially blocking traffic as part of the community response to alert neighbors of the presence of immigration officers. Almost immediately after the shooting, before the crime scene had even been fully processed, the Department of Homeland Security put out a statement. They didn't just defend the agent, they called Renee Good a domestic terrorist. Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, repeated the claim in a press conference 30 minutes later.
The shooting that we just had in Minneapolis, Minnesota, it was an act of domestic terrorism.
A woman was dead, and the head of the DHS was already on television declaring her a terrorist before any consideration of an investigation. Now she's appeared on CNN to defend her statements. Tapper starts the interview by pointing out something a Republican senator found troubling.
You've also been criticized for your comments. The shooting, we should note, was Wednesday at 10:37 a.m. Eastern. Just over 2 hours later, the Department of Homeland Security put out a statement definitively asserting what had happened, defending the ICE agent, accusing Renee Good of domestic terrorism. That's a characterization that you reiterated in a press conference half an hour later. Now, Republican Senator Tom Tillis said, quote, "It was very unusual to have a senior law enforcement official to draw a conclusion about an event where the scene was still being processed. Generally speaking, law enforcement would recognize that a life was lost, that families are changed forever, the shooter's life will change forever. We're collecting video, we're trying to assess the situation." Why did you not wait for an investigation before making your comments?
Now, this isn't some Democrat making this criticism. This is Tom Tillis, a Republican senator, acknowledging that it was very unusual for a senior official to declare someone a domestic terrorist while the crime scene tape was still up. And Noem's response?
Well, everything that I've said has been proven to be factual and the truth. This administration wants to operate in transparency. I have the responsibility as the Secretary of Homeland Security to know this information as soon as possible.
Has it? That would certainly be unusual. So let's look at what she actually said.
The first thing you said was, quote, "What happened was our ICE officers were out in an enforcement action. They got stuck in the snow because of the adverse weather that is in Minneapolis. They were attempting to push out their vehicle and a woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over and rammed them with her vehicle." That's not what happened. We all saw what happened.
It absolutely is what happened.
She describes a driver who attempted to run them over and rammed them with her vehicle. Tapper points out the obvious problem.
That's not what happened. We all saw what happened.
It absolutely is what happened.
So let's look at what actually happened. The New York Times did a forensic analysis of the video DHS themselves released. The agent who shot the driver walked around filming the car. Other agents run up and immediately start grabbing at the door handle and reaching inside. The SUV reverses, then turns right, away from the officers, apparently attempting to leave. The moment the agent fires, he is standing to the left of the vehicle. The wheels are pointing to the right, away from him. That's not ramming, is it? That's not attempting to run over them. That's a car turning away from someone who then shoots through the window anyway. Tapper is right, we all saw it, which is why we know Trump, Vance, and Noem are lying to us. Now, watch Noem's pivot when confronted with this.
You said that the woman attacked them and surrounded them and attempted to run them over and ram them with her vehicle.
Blocked the road for a long time and was yelling at them and impeding a federal law enforcement investigation. And that's what you need to focus on, Jake, is they were breaking the law by impeding and obstructing a law enforcement operation. They were breaking the law already, and these officers were doing their due diligence and what their training had prepared them to do to make sure they were handling it appropriately.
Did you catch that? she abandoned her own claim. She started with ramming and attempts to run over. When that falls apart, suddenly the crime becomes block the road and yelling. That is quite the downgrade from domestic terrorism to being rude in traffic.
That's what you need to focus on, Jake, is they were breaking the law by impeding and obstructing a law enforcement operation. They were breaking the law already.
Renee was breaking the law. That's what's important. That's what we should focus on. No. What we need to focus on is that you called a woman a domestic terrorist for blocking traffic, and your agent shot her for trying to drive away. And Noem keeps doubling down.
You said within hours of her being killed, you said that she was a domestic terrorist. How do you define domestic terrorist?
She weaponized her vehicle to conduct an act of violence against a law enforcement officer and the public. As they are doing that,
how can you assert with certainty that she was trying to hurt the officer as opposed to she was trying to flee the scene?
if you look at what the definition of domestic terrorism is, it completely fits the situation on the ground. This individual, as you saw in the video that we released just 48 hours after this incident, showed that this officer was hit by her vehicle, she weaponized it, and he defended his life.
She claims Renee weaponized her vehicle, but the wheels were pointing away from the agent when he opened fire. The car was turning right. He was standing on the left. The forensic evidence from the administration's own video shows a car trying to leave, not a car trying to kill. Tapper keeps pressing.
What evidence are you looking at that so many other people around the country look at and they say, it looked to me, her tires were turned to the right, she was moving her car, and they see a woman trying to flee. You say she was trying to kill the officer. No investigation has happened. Why are you so certain that your interpretation is the truth when an investigation hasn't even happened?
Jake, I'm watching the videos.
Other people are
talking
watching
to officers,
the videos
I'm getting
and
the
coming
facts.
to a different conclusion.
Everything that we've stated as the Department of Homeland Security and this administration has been factual.
That's an interesting way to describe video evidence that contradicts your narrative, but here's where it gets really damning. Tapper quotes DHS's own policy.
DHS policy authorizes use of deadly force only, quote, when no reasonably effective, safe, and feasible alternatives appears to exist. Could he not have just gotten out of the way?
This individual and this officer is a highly experienced law enforcement officer. He has years of training and specialized training for these types of situations. We're grateful that he's alive.
Did you notice what she didn't do? She didn't answer the question. DHS policy says deadly force is only authorized when no reasonable, effective, safe, or feasible alternative exists. And in fact, we can go further. It says not to shoot at moving vehicles. This is directly from the Department of Homeland Security's policy statement 044-05. DHS, LEOs, law enforcement officers, are prohibited from discharging firearms at the operator of a moving vehicle, vessel, aircraft, or other conveyance unless the use of deadly force against the operator is justified under the standards articulated elsewhere in the policy. Before using deadly force under these circumstances, the LEO must take into consideration the hazards that may be posed to law enforcement and innocent bystanders by an out-of-control conveyance. I'm pretty confident in saying that the agent, Jonathan Ross, did not follow policy. The car was turning away from him. Getting out of the way, especially when he's already to the left of the vehicle, was absolutely a feasible alternative. But Noem can't engage with that. Of course she can't, because engaging with it means the shooting might not have been justified. So instead, she pivots to praising his years of training and being grateful he's alive. The training defense is particularly hollow when you consider what the training is supposed to teach. Use deadly force as a last resort. And then there's this.
Get out of the car. Get out of the car. Whoa! Fucking bitch.
That's evidently Agent Ross himself calling Renee Good a fucking bitch just after shooting her 3 times. That's not the sound of someone who just narrowly escaped death, is it? That's the sound of contempt, someone who lost their temper. But wait, it gets worse. Tapper brings up something Vice President Vance said publicly.
In June of last year, Agent Ross had his arm pinned in the back window of a car as an undocumented immigrant who was a criminal drove away from a traffic stop. It dragged him about 100 yards. Here's what Vice President Vance said about the incident this week.
That very ICE officer nearly had his life ended, dragged by a car 6 months ago, 33 stitches in his leg. So you think maybe he's a little bit sensitive about somebody ramming him with an automobile?
If this is relevant, first of all, it's horrible that that happened. If it's relevant, which the vice president seems to think it is, do you think this understandably very traumatic event that this officer went through last June might have influenced, as the vice president is suggesting happened, how he responded?
Let's be clear about what Vance is saying here. He's publicly suggesting that the officer's past trauma influenced his decision to shoot. He's offering it as a defense. But think about what this actually means. If the officer was a little bit sensitive about cars because of a prior incident, that's not a justification, Vance. That's an argument he shouldn't have been in this situation at all. That's an argument his judgment might have been compromised. Here's Noem's response.
Now, there's no indication to that, but the facts is that we've seen vehicles weaponized over 100 times in the last several months against our law enforcement officers. So they definitely know that the threat is real, that individuals who are trained by activists to go out and to impede their law enforcement operations will weaponize their vehicles and try to run them over and drag them and not stop.
No indication of that, but also officers go into these situations with that knowledge. She's trying to have it both ways. The prior trauma isn't relevant to the decision, but also officers are hypervigilant about vehicles because of prior incidents. Which is it? Tapper then asks about something specific in the video.
The officer appeared to have fired 3 shots, the first one through the front windshield, the second and third through the side window. What is the justification for the second and third, given that the officer was out of harm's way?
You're watching the same videos that I am, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're watching the same ones, so you see how quickly the situation unfolded, how the officer was in front of the vehicle when she sped off, how she ran into him, and how he had to take quick action based on his training to defend himself and his colleagues around him.
I'm asking a question is, when he's out of harm's way, what is the reason for the second and third shot through the window when he is out, he's not in the line of sight of the car?
This investigation will continue to unfold and more information will come forward.
2 hours after the shooting, she had apparently enough information to call Renee a domestic terrorist. She had enough information to defend the officer's actions completely. But when asked about the second and third shots fired after the car had passed him, suddenly this investigation will continue to unfold. I mean, seriously, man. I know there are some dumb MAGA activists, but how do they buy that? Really, Noem can declare a dead woman a terrorist before the crime scene has processed, but she needs to wait for the investigation to explain why an officer kept shooting at the car that was driving away. Sure thing. And then Tapper springs it.
I want to ask a question about the rules of how law enforcement is allowed to engage when feeling threatened, per your assertions. Because I want to show some video to you right now and ask, what is the appropriate response for the police officers in this situation? Those are law enforcement officers being physically attacked. By this standard, would any of those officers be justified in shooting and killing the people causing them physical harm?
That's the question. Clean, direct, impossible to dodge without exposing yourself. If ICE agents can shoot someone whose car was moving away from them, surely Capitol Police could have shot people who were actively beating them with flagpoles. Here's Noem's response.
Every single situation is going to rely on the situation those officers are on. That they know that when people are putting hands on them, when they are using weapons against them, when they are physically harming them, that they have the authority to arrest those individuals.
Arrest. Not shoot. Arrest. When Trump supporters beat cops with flagpoles, they have the authority to arrest those individuals. When a woman's car begins to flee an ICE agent, that's grounds for lethal force. The double standard isn't even subtle. She's just stating it out loud. But Tapper doesn't let her escape into abstraction.
President Trump pardoned every single one of those people.
And every single one of these investigations comes in the full context of the situation on the ground. And that's one thing that President Trump has been so focused on, is making sure that when we're out there, we don't pick and choose which situations are and which laws are enforced and which ones aren't. Every single one of them is being enforced under the Trump administration.
He just showed her a video of people assaulting federal officers. He just told her Trump pardoned all of them. And her response is that Trump didn't pick and choose. He didn't choose to pardon the people who tried to overthrow an election while calling them patriots. He didn't choose to pardon Steve Bannon for fraud, or Roger Stone for lying to Congress, or Charles Kushner for witness tampering. From where I'm standing, thankfully across the pond, it seems like the laws only apply to people Trump doesn't like.
There's a different standard for law enforcement officials being attacked if they're being attacked by Trump supporters. We just saw that.
That's it. That is the whole thing. Undisputed evidence of assaults on police. Mass pardons for the perpetrators. And she just said laws are enforced equally. Watch how she responds when she has nowhere left to go.
This individual and these instances and these investigations all have to be taken and done correctly in context of every situation that is happening on the ground. So what we are doing today as the Department of Homeland Security is out there with our law enforcement officers, making sure that we're targeting the worst of the worst.
That is her escape hatch. Every time Tapper pins her down, she retreats to context. It sounds reasonable. Of course context matters. But what she's actually saying is, the context that matters is whether the person involved supports Trump. That's it. That is the only context that determines whether you get shot or pardoned. She can't say that, so she has to say context and hopes that you don't notice. That's the tell here. She's not defending a position because it's right, she's defending it because she has to. The administration committed to his narrative within 2 hours of the shooting. They called Renee a terrorist before they'd even finished processing the scene. And now the Secretary of Homeland Security has to pretend the video doesn't show what it obviously shows. To pretend that ICE didn't prevent doctors from attempting to save Renee's life. This is what loyalty over competence looks like. This is what happens when your only qualification for a cabinet position is willingness to say whatever Trump needs. Noem isn't stupid. She knows the video contradicts her. She knows Tom Tillis was right, that this was unusual to declare someone a terrorist before investigating. She knows the January 6th comparison exposes the double standard completely. She knows all of this, and she has to pretend she doesn't. Because in this administration, the job isn't to be right. The job is to never admit Trump's people were wrong. Even when the video is right there, even when a Republican senator is calling you out, even when your own words shift from ramming to blocking traffic in the span of 30 seconds, even when the vice president publicly suggests the officer might have been traumatized into overreacting and offers that as a defense. Context, she keeps saying. It all depends on context. And she's right about that, actually, just not in the way that she means. The context is everything. The context is, are you with Trump or against him? That's the only context that matters anymore. That is what determines whether you get shot or pardoned, whether you're a patriot or a terrorist, whether the video evidence matters or gets explained away. That is not law enforcement. That's loyalty enforcement. And Kristi Noem just spent an entire interview proving it.